Imagine spending 70 years of your life in an iron lung, a world of limitations turned into a remarkable journey of resilience and triumph. Meet Alexander, a man whose life defies conventions and proves that true strength knows no boundaries. This man has been locked in this machine for 70 years. Alexander, 77, has led a life unlike many others. For the majority of his life, he has lived with an iron lung, and he is one of the last persons in the world still using the 1928 respirator. Despite his unusual conditions, he has lived an extraordinarily complete existence and has never settled for anything less. I'm not going to tolerate anyone's limitations on my life because my life is amazing. Paul was 6 years old when he rushed into his family's house in Dallas, Texas, and informed his mother that he wasn't feeling well. He had been a typically vibrant and active child since his birth in 1946. But now something was clearly wrong. "Oh my God, not my kid." He recalled something his mother had said. He spent the following few days in bed, recuperating as directed by the doctor. But the boy was still, obviously, suffering from polio and showing no signs of improvement. He couldn't retain anything, swallow, or breathe. Less than a week after he began feeling ill, his parents eventually hurried him to the hospital, where he joined countless other children having identical symptoms prior to the availability of immunizations. Reportedly, more than 15,000 individuals were paralyzed each year, a result of the polio infection. Polio is an extremely contagious illness that can spread even when an individual is asymptomatic. A doctor examined Paul and declared him deceased, but another doctor examined him and offered him a second shot at life. The second doctor conducted an emergency tracheotomy, and Paul was then put inside an iron lung. When he awoke 3 days later, he was among several aisles of children who were also enclosed in iron locks. I had no idea what had occurred. I had all kinds of imaginings that I had perished, and I kept asking myself if this is how the end of life is. Paul, who also had a tracheotomy, was unable to speak, making the whole thing even more terrifying. I attempted to move, but I couldn't even move a finger. I attempted to touch something to work it out, but I never could, so the machine's invention was quite strange. He was the first to breathe human being in the late 1920s. It was often referred to as the drinker respirator in its early days because it is hermetically sealed from the neck down and produces a negative pressure in the chamber that pulls air into the patient's lungs. If it produces too much pressure, the oxygen is pushed out of the lungs and the patient exhales. Paul had been inside the metal canister for 18 months, recovering from the original infection. And he wasn't alone. According to the statistics, the year Paul was affected by the virus was a very gloomy year. In 1952, nearly 60,000 individuals, mostly minors, were infected with the virus in the United States. Unfortunately, nearly 3,000 of them perished. He'd hear doctors tell him he'd expire today, or that he shouldn't be alive whenever they passed by, and he wanted to prove them incorrect. He was released from the hospital in 9, but he quickly discovered that his life had changed dramatically. People didn't like him back then, he said in a 2021 video interview. "I felt they were uneasy around me. But with the aid of a therapist called Mrs. Sullivan, who visited him twice a week, his life gradually improved." His therapist made a bargain with him that if he could frog breathe for 3 minutes without the iron lung, she'd get him a puppy. It was challenging work, but after a year, Paul was able to spend more and more time outside on the iron lawn. When he was 21, he became the first individual to graduate with honors from Dallas High School without ever physically attending class. After several denials, he was accepted to Southern Methodist University. "They claimed I was too disabled and lacked the immunization," he recalled. "After 2 years of tormenting them, they agreed to adopt me on 2 conditions. 1, that I receive the polio scene, and 2, that a fraternity would be responsible for me." He then entered law school at the University of Texas at Austin. After graduating from Southern Methodist University, he passed the bar and went on to become a lawyer in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. And I was a pretty decent one as well. Even after a 30-year career in the courts, he kept himself occupied by writing a book, which he penned entirely by hand with a pen connected to his stick. According to Gizmodo, Paul is one of the last individuals living today who lives in a nearly obsolete machine. Ben. The 77-year-old has lived much of his life in a can and is limited to his ancient iron lung around the clock. I've traveled with it, placed it in a truck, and brought it with me to college. I stayed in a dorm with it, which freaked everyone out, he said, because ventilators are now much more refined and sophisticated. The pulse form of iron lung hasn't been manufactured in over a half-century. Despite the fact that new technologies are accessible, polio survivor prefers this metal box. When the metal lung nearly collapsed 7 years ago, the Dallas attorney was forced to make a frantic YouTube announcement. Fortunately, there are still abandoned devices all over the nation, so there are plenty of spare components. Paul also received assistance from enthusiasts who enjoy approaching outdated technology. Many individuals who had polio are in debt. What did they do with their iron lungs? I discovered them in arms, he adds. I found them in garages and junk shops. Not much, but enough to scrounge, reports Paul outlived both of his parents and his older sibling and is now working on the second book. Paul stated that he has been able to live such a full existence because he has never given up. I wish to accomplish the things I was told I couldn't do and to realize the dreams I had. Polio has been completely eradicated in the United States since 1979. However, vaccine-derived cases of polio appear from time to time, which is still reason for worry. Paul has certainly created an influence with his work. His determination demonstrates that the only boundaries are the ones we impose on ourselves. Alexander's story challenges us to break free from self-imposed barriers, to overcome adversity, and to never give up on the dreams that fuel our souls. Join us on this extraordinary voyage of a man who turned confinement into a remarkable legacy of strength, resilience, and unwavering determination.